Welcome, everybody, to the Build Community Through Love podcast. I am the host, Dr. Joe Daniels. I have a special guest on the show today, my mentor, Miss Crystal McDonald. Welcome.
Thank you,
How,
Joey.
how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me here with you today.
There's I just remember leaving high school, and there was like 5 people who have the biggest impact on my trajectory from Silver Spring, Maryland. And so I remember I was like, I got to play football. I want to play football and I'll get a degree, but I need to play football. Like that has to be the thing. And so dad was like, okay, well, figure out where you need to go and, at least have a place where if football doesn't work out, you can get a degree. So engineering was always a thing. And so dad was like, okay, well, there's a lady at church. Her and her husband, they both went to A&T. Let's see what they have to say. And then you guys, I think, convinced my parents so much that they took me to A&T on Valentine's Day weekend.
What?
And I had a girlfriend in high school, and you know how that is. You gonna take me away from my girlfriend on Valentine's Day. And so I can say that me and that girlfriend didn't work out, but I fell in love with A&T, and I have you to thank for that. So thank you so much, and I thank you for being on the show today.
Oh, thank you, Joey. Thank you. I'm humbled, and I'm glad you made that decision.
Absolutely.
I really am.
Aggie pride.
Aggie pride was one of the best
pride.
decisions of my life, for sure.
So real quick, I just want to dive into your background because I know that you're from Washington, D.C., or you're a native Washingtonian, just like my mom. And so, walk me through that, like how that was back when you were growing up in the D.C. public school system, and because you went to Dunbar, right?
I did.
So take me back to some of those experiences.
So I hail from, they call it Uptown in D.C.
Okay.
First few years of my life were not far from where Emory Fellowship is located. I grew up 14th and Tuckerman, and then I moved to what's known as North Michigan Park near Providence Hospital. And that was my hood. That was my neighborhood. It was the neighborhood where I walked to the McDonald's on South Dakota Avenue. I rode my bike everywhere. And yes, I was educated in DC public schools. I went through Barnard Elementary, Bertie Backus Junior High School, right there on South Dakota Avenue. And then for high school, I wanted to do something different from my friends from Bertie Backus. And I knew I had an interest in arts and sciences. And so Dunbar Pre-Engineering program. It was the second year of Dunbar Pre-Engineering High School. And fortunately, I applied to the program and was accepted. And I tell you, it was one of the, another great experience for me because that allowed us to have like a school within a school and really focus on arts and sciences. And not all of my classmates studied engineering, graduated to study engineering, but most of them did pretty well. And you have to understand the dynamics of that time. I graduated from high school in 87. So this was like right in the thick of the crack epidemic in DC. So, I used to take the public transportation, get off on North Capitol Street and walk through some neighborhoods where, it wasn't safe at all. And, it was the first time I saw somebody shoot up in the alley. That was when I got my education on what the hustler life was, the drug dealers and so on. But from that bus stop all the way to Dunbar, I learned a lot on the streets of DC. But when I got into Dunbar High School, it was all about being exposed and having certain experiences that just, stretched my imagination. And I'm forever grateful to the administrators of that program and the teachers of that program. So Dunbar was everything to me for 3 years of my life. And so during that exposure, I had opportunities to travel abroad. I traveled with a delegation to China. So imagine that, a little Black girl from DC traveling with a national delegation to China. And this was during the Reagan years when, right after the Reagan years when China opened up to the West. And so our delegation was to go and establish a sisterly relationship between Washington, D.C. and Beijing. And at the same time, we had opportunity to travel across the country to several different provinces, some urban, some rural, and then some suburban. So lots of different exposure. And then we had summer opportunities. Like I had a summer job at the Navy Yard working with a real engineer and a real architect, So like I said, it was all about early exposure. And it got me to thinking like, what can I really do with my life? And so from after I graduated from high school, by then I explored different colleges. I was very interested in architectural engineering.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of honed in on AE like very early because I was like, oh, this is exciting because it's a mix of the arts as well as engineering. So it brought the design world together with the technical world. And I was really all set to go to Drexel. Imagine that, right?
Drexel?
Drexel University. Yes.
I applied to Drexel.
Yes.
Shout out to Drexel.
Yep. And so, I mean, at that time, there were only about 5 or 6 architectural engineering programs on the East Coast, and A&T had one of them. So one of my neighbors, an A&T alum, had gathered a bunch of kids, and he's like, hey, Crystal, he talked to my parents, let's go to A&T. And so I was the oldest one of the bunch, and keep in mind, I had already set my sights on Drexel University. So went down to A&T for University Day weekend, and my life was forever changed because, it was just a sense of warmth and comfort on that campus. And then I was able to speak to the dean of architectural engineering like that weekend. That's what I'll never forget, Dr. Rajeski. We had a conversation about my interests, what I wanted to do. And then, after that conversation and then speaking to some other kids on campus, it was like, I belong here. This is where I belong. And so, we set the paperwork in motion, like without my parents' knowledge and all of that. But 2 weeks later, I was accepted at A&T. And as they say, the rest is history. Aggie Land is where I grew up as an individual, where I became even more exposed to lots of different people from diverse backgrounds. And yes, it is an HBCU, but we're not a monolithic group. We all have different experiences. We come from different places. We don't all speak the same way. We don't all dress the same way. So it was a different kind of diversity for me that it changed my life. But at the same time, while I was dealing with a difficult academic subject, I had unbelievable support from my dean and staff, and even like grad students and so on. So it was awesome. It was awesome.
So take me back real quick, because I want to have a quick segue before we get back into it. But talk to me about, especially as you look back and reflect on your high school experience and going to China and going all across the United States. Talk to me about what you think the level of access that you had and exposure that you had and how important that is. And, did that set you apart from those who were also having to walk down the same streets that you walk down, past people shooting up, past people selling dope, past people getting arrested or frisked? Talk to me about what the importance of exposure meant to you and your development.
My mom especially, but my parents in general, they were just very supportive of, taking family trips and going places. My mom was originally from North Carolina. She's from Farmville, North Carolina, and she rests in peace. And my dad is a Washingtonian. But my mother was adamant about doing different things, going different places. Even she was adamant about getting out of our zip code. there were times when she took us to different events, like here in DC. I remember one time, I had never been to a ski resort in my life as a kid, but there was an exhibit down on the ellipse behind the White House where somebody came in and built like hills so you can have a cross country skiing experience. You know, to me, that was incredible for a kid who has never been to a ski resort or just to skiing. So she was very adamant about getting us out of the zip code and traveling where we could, you know, even to North Carolina and beyond. And I think that sense of adventure and curiosity always sat with me. And so when the opportunity came for me to go to China, I actually went to China with my high school principal, junior high school principal, Mr. Millard, who led the delegation. And while it was something new for my entire family, who had never even thought about going to any place in Asia, it was a sense of adventure. And I remember being nervous about it. And my parents were probably nervous, but my mother taught me what faith was at that time. She said, you're going over the ocean. It was probably like a 13 or 14-hour flight. You're going over the ocean. And keep in mind, I was doing a study tour on mainland China as well, flying or taking a train or what have you. But she says, just know that your faith is strong enough to keep that plane up in the sky going over that ocean. So I just believe my faith was strong enough to do anything to move mountains. Because, you know, it was kind of shaky sometimes. But then, you know, I also had my aerodynamics course in my head because I had taken aerodynamics at Dunbar. And I was just like, okay, you know, we can do this. We can do this. But I just remember her instilling that sense of curiosity and adventure, and more than anything, that faith that I could just do anything. And I'm not limited to my zip code. I'm not limited to what's happening in DC, you know, because I had pretty good, pretty solid foundation, you know, raised in the church and then involved in civic organizations. Growing up, I was a part of the early classes at the Mayor Barry's Youth Leadership Institute.
Mm-hmm.
Still have lots of good friends from that program. That program still exists to this day, thankfully. So pretty solid upbringing. But what changed my life was leaving the zip code, leaving DC, and just kind of getting beyond your comfortable surroundings. So yeah, it was incredible.
Dope.
It was incredible. Yeah.
And so you end up in Greensboro, North Carolina.
Yes.
Home of the A&T 4, home of just great Aggies through and through from the beginning.
From astronauts to presidents.
Look, let me tell you something.
When I was there, that's what the chancellor used to always say, from astronauts to presidents.
There is actually a Ronald McNair Junior High School out here in Arkansas.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, look at that. Okay, I see you, boy. I see you. So I'm like, come through. He went to T. Hold on. Let's get this.
Yes.
So you get there, and now you've gone from fast-paced DC. Now you're in Greensboro. It was slower lifestyle, and so now you've kind of put your grips into this engineering thing for real. And so it's not just pre-engineering anymore. You in here, you know, doing the real. And so what was your experience at A&T with the rigors of the engineering program? And then where did you want to take your career, even while you were still in school?
You know, at that time, with the rigors of the coursework, you know, I was always a social butterfly. So I had to figure out a way to balance that, being sociable and, you know, really focusing on my classes, because I also had a scholarship. And in order to maintain that scholarship, I had to maintain a certain GPA. So that kind of kept me balanced. You know, if I wanted to stay in school, I needed to maintain a certain GPA. But again, I wanted to do the social thing. Fortunately, I mentioned the nurturing spirit of Aggie Land before. There were some engineering students ahead of me, of course, who invited me to NSBE, the National Society of Black Engineers meeting. And from there, it's like I took on a new family, a very supportive family that was always encouraging. And, we did things, we had fun. We traveled to meet other engineering students on other campuses, learning that we all have similar challenges. But we were also exposed to professional Black engineers. It's just like, wow. And they were doing everything all over the place. I mean, from entrepreneurial folks to, people who were, say, in biomedical engineering, to electrical engineering, designers, and there's just in the incredible array of opportunity in the field of engineering. I had the good fortune, like I said, to be exposed to some professional engineers, but never to the degree that NSBE exposed me to. But I also had a scholarship at the Potomac Electric Power Company. We know it as PEPCO, the local utility company. And they brought me back every summer for an internship. And so that gave me exposure as well. And I had a fantastic mentor who is now a utility executive. She went back to Jamaica, became a utility executive. But they gave me like real projects, real topics to like do some critical thinking and problem solve. And it was just an incredible feeling to take a problem or a concept and bring it to fruition. Seeing that was exciting to me. And I just wanted to make that happen. Not only was it powerful, but it was like meaningful. My mom used to always say, if you start something, you need to finish it. And, to see that product come into fruition, it was just like very rewarding. And so from that, I stuck with the utility company. Other than the fact it was there, during that time when I graduated, I forget which administration it was, but the economy was challenged. And so I was just fortunate to come out and have a job, be able to be employed and, attractive salary, fantastic opportunity, and so incredible benefits. And I got a lot of exposure while I was at PEPCO. And you think it's an electric utility company, but I also I used my AE degree to work with new construction projects. And so that created a lane with me in relationships with architects and engineers and so on. And in working in utility, it was all about energy, right? And so that gave me exposure to the world of energy efficiency. And I'm just like, wow. So it's just like one thing led to the next. And I tell anybody with engineering, I mean, you pretty much can go anywhere after you've had that discipline of studying engineering, completing a degree, but it can take you into so many different directions. It becomes a building block. So moving from that strictly architectural engineering background, moving into building environmental systems, that's, your heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, your lighting. As you know, civil engineers are responsible for the structure, the foundation, and all of that. And then with commercial energy services, you get very involved in how does the building feel? Are the occupants comfortable? Do they have the right systems? How do we give them a comfortable experience using the least amount of energy? And that's where the energy efficiency piece comes into. And so from there, I went on to George Washington University and pursued a degree in energy and environmental management at the School of Engineering. So the degree is actually called Master's in Engineering Management. They've evolved like most universities and call that something else by now. But I now work with several younger people who have the same degree, actually. So anyway, that gave me even more exposure to issues of the environment and sustainability. So, you combine the energy efficiency and the sustainability efforts that are happening around the world. I remember the first policy that I remember studying to the nth degree in grad school was around the Kyoto Protocol. which has evolved over the years. And most recently, we may know it as the Paris Agreement. Yeah. So lots of policies that have been put in place around the world to, people, we want to live a certain lifestyle. So we want to use energy, but how do we use energy with fewer natural resources?
For sure.
So, yeah. So
that's deep. So because of your internship with Pepco, you opened up to this new world that may not have been introduced to you in your textbooks and in your course seminars and on whatever, but because you had that real world experience while you were going through school, you were able to then utilize the resources you had while at A&T, the connections that you made through NSBE, and then be able to use your internship to kind of craft this and actually navigate this path through energy. And I'm sure, and I'm sure you didn't go to school for energy, but that's kind of where that's the lane that you saw that you could have, that interests you, that you saw that you could have value in, and that you were able to navigate. And I think the one thing that I liked the most about what you said was being able to, see things and that interests you in your lane, and then traverse those areas. Because when people go to school for engineering, and I get this question a lot since I have a PhD in engineering. I was in school for dag near 10 years pursuing engineering, right? And so oftentimes the idea is I'm going to go get a mechanical engineering degree. I'm going to go get an electrical engineering degree so that I can go work at this. And it's just like, keep that in mind, but, be open to experiencing different pivot points within your career, because engineering, like you said earlier about A&T, is not monolithic. And so there's all types of ways that you can go. And so real quick question, did you go to GW right after A&T, or did you or were you fascinated by the internship and a job first that made you go back to GW?
No, after A&T and I started working for Pepco full time, I just wanted to rest, relax, enjoy a paycheck, and really figure out what my next step would be. Because, after you land that first job, you realize that is not your final destination.
Talk about
it. Exactly. It's not your final destination. And I just became more in tune with real world situations, climate change. And, back then the big thing for us was refrigerants causing, greenhouse gas effects. So greenhouse gases were a huge thing back then, and caused by, man-made pollution. But anyway, I started looking at that, and I started thinking about, okay, Chris, what is your real purpose in life? And I started thinking about environmental stewardship. And I started thinking about scripture, how the scripture tells us that we are to govern our earth and take care of our the animal life and natural resources. We're called to do that. And I'm just like, wow, how can I put, what I've studied professionally to the stewardship that I believe God has called me to. And so, and that's when I became more focused on sustainability issues. So, I did a career, I did my stint as a commercial energy services engineer at Pepco. And then I went on to do some engineering consulting. And then from there, because of my role in energy efficiency, and I was a part of professional organizations and so on, so got some exposure, and then was recruited to move to Chicago. I worked with what we now know, the parent company is Exelon, but I moved there to work at Commonwealth Edison, the utility company for Chicago. And then from there, I jumped over to the deregulated side of the business. It was a competitive business. And that's where we were giving people choice to choose their energy supplier so they could save money. Utility bills are always what they call kitchen table issue. That that didn't pan out, not because of our business structure, but back then there was this huge debacle with Enron, which impacted our business and our ability to sell power competitively. It was really bad back then, late 90s, early 2000s. Like, I remember small manufacturers like going out of business because of the inflated cost of power. So utility expenses are a real thing for just everyday operations. So that was huge. And the other thing I realized during that Exelon experience is that what we were trying to do in energy, it was like we were trying to use this patchwork approach without a national energy policy. And I realized, we can't do this. We can't try to do retail wheeling from one state to the next, and the state in the middle is just not interested. It's like, we're good. Our cost of power is cheap. But the two neighboring states, the cost of power is driving people out of business. So we called it retail wheeling back then. But anyway, without a national policy, it just wasn't working. And so I became interested in policy after that. So so business went down, and I actually took a package and came back home. It took me years to get back into the energy world. And, I still earned a living, and I still did some fun and exciting things. I did some marketing domestically and internationally. So that was exciting. But during the previous administration, I had an opportunity to get back into energy efficiency, renewable energy. That was my world, right? And so I went back I was accepted into the government under the Obama administration. And it was awesome. The impact, the programs we were making back then, that's when the economy was tanking, like late 2008, 2009. So I started in the government, 2010? And under the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act. And so that's when I really became interested in policy and how we use policy as a tool to solve problems for our citizens, right? In my role there, I worked on projects across the country. I did have a chance to sit on a panel with the Environmental Protection Agency. They did an environmental justice panel down in Port Arthur, Texas. This is when I knew that I had to do something to help my people. Went down to Port Arthur, Texas. The mayor, she was awesome. Her grandson was in Howard. She found out I was from DC. She was so excited. But anyway, after sitting on that environmental justice panel, I realized the impact of, when our folks are living in climates that just aren't clean, and the health impact. You look at the rate of illnesses where the groundwater is dirty or the air is polluted, and you were in a hurricane zone. You got your FEMA money, but you rebuilt right along the brown fence line where there's like oil tank farms. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. And then it's like, okay, the big companies are saying, we're bringing our business here. We're going to hire local people. But I find out that the workers at those tank farms, they've been imported in. So, and they get up every day. They're living in the same hotel where I was staying, getting up every day to go work at these refineries and these oil tank farms and so on. So what happens to the workforce development in the local community? Why aren't they getting this high paid jobs and getting this skills training and so on and so forth? And then I took a tour around the city, and this was not long after one of the hurricanes, and it broke my heart. I was like, I'm supposed to be a professional, but I'm like in tears, crying at how, my community is suffering down in Port Arthur, Texas. That's when I knew we have to educate. We got to educate, and we got to reach out to people to really make that connection. And I think that's what was missing. People, yes, they're concerned about paying their bills, as they should, but there is a way to save on the cost of your bills and also be healthy where you live. So tying those environmental justice issues with energy efficiency and learning how to live with sustainable energy alternatives, all of that matters to the longevity and the health and well-being of you as an individual and as a community. So my goal then became to connect the dots for these marginalized communities, and it's all interrelated. It really is.
And that's interesting, because if you look at your job title, or if you just look at your job experience from a resume standpoint, you don't necessarily think about energy being, the core connection of a community at all. And
Mm-hmm.
so, but now that you point that out, it makes sense, right? Like where are your landfills typically located? Where are your power plants typically located? Where are your
Exactly.
And so you start thinking about energy fundamentally from an engineering standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then you start going out and you begin to branch out, and you're saying, okay, now, policy is great, but then you start thinking about policy from just um, a fan in the stands standpoint. So you're just looking at what's happening, but now you're saying, okay, well, these policies are affecting where businesses make their headquarters, where businesses are able to, build their manufacturing plants. I did my internships with a big oil company, oil and petroleum,
Mm-hmm.
upstream and downstream. And so you start thinking about from that standpoint, okay, well, where do you have your refineries and who gets to work at your refineries? And so
Right.
talk to me about, like, certain policies that stick out that you're allowed to talk about, that you were able to try to craft and begin to push to see that, certain communities that were disenfranchised were able to actually be helped out based on policy.
Sure. So I didn't craft this particular policy, but I was able to use it to get the job done that was intended. I mentioned the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act. Basically, that was a big stimulus plan. That was to um, use, the administration had, allocated a lot of cash to be infused into our economy to keep people going, to get cities, states, companies going. And, at the core of that was the Energy Information and Securities Act that was signed by the Bush administration. I want to say it was around 2007. I'm sorry, I don't have my textbook with me, Joey, but
I thought you wrote the
so
textbook.
so the agency was responsible for looking at energy from a national security perspective. Um, so we use that along with cash to help communities, states, local governments, school districts, and so on, help communities identify energy efficiency projects or sustainable energy projects that will provide jobs for the community as well as improve their energy performance. And that was phenomenal. I did a lot of small grants, and I was responsible for the state of South Carolina and Texas, but I also did some larger projects like in California, a water district, Central Basin Water District, and Arizona. Yeah, where was? No, I was in New Mexico. It was a recycling hub. Learning how to reduce and reuse, right? Realizing that some of the materials that material waste products, they do have an end life market value, so you could bundle that stuff and resell it and so on. So but seeing the impact of that program, that restored dignity, gave people jobs to actually implement something that will help their communities, like the LED street lights, traffic lights, and so on. That was extremely rewarding. When you go and talk to a small town mayor, they don't care who's in office. They just want their people to be able to work and buy groceries for their families. Or you talk to a school district and they're just happy to get some LED lights that's going to help improve their classroom environment so kids can actually enjoy the benefits of decent lighting, or, speak to a state energy office director who are trying to create green jobs as well as deploy these projects. So to see that kind of activity happening directly on the ground was extremely rewarding. You know, they didn't care about the infighting going on Capitol Hill.
Right.
You know, they cared about putting food on their tables.
The basic needs to have a sustainable community.
Exactly.
That makes so much sense. And so
Yeah.
what's the trend right now in the direction of green energy, renewable energy? If I read somewhere correct, I think Hawaii wanted to become completely 100% renewable by like 2048 or something like that, or 2040
Yeah.
maybe. And so, you know, what's the direction? I know with the current administration, a lot of things when it comes to energy has been taken out because we want to replace everything with clean coal. Yeah. Pause for that moment, but
well, you know what? This is what I'm going to say. This is what I'm going to say because I have since left the government over a year ago. But I worked on an awesome platform that still exists. It's called Better Buildings, and I worked on that platform for a while before leaving. And that's where we took best practices and tools and resources that could be shared from every sector of our economy and sort of develop this repository of case studies, calculators, everything that could be used. And it now sits on what's called the Better Building Solution Center. And it's a repository of information for every sector of the economy, from production plants to a local school. And anybody who was interested in saving energy, financing their energy projects, looking for a case study, wanting technical references, or even pictures, a diagram. One of the things I led while at the agency, at the U.S. Department of Energy, was an outdoor lighting accelerator. And that was to help cities and states recognize the benefits of LED street lighting or any type of roadway lighting. Because utility costs are a significant cost in cities. But with these conversions, we were seeing cities save up to 50, 60, 75% on their utility costs. And so we develop materials to help them decide if they want to move forward with it or not, you know, looking at the technical and economic feasibility. So that information still sits there. And there's still some fantastic folks working in the agency, but I did leave the agency with an opportunity to work closer to home. And so now I'm working on at what's called the energy efficiency utility. It's known as the DC Sustainable Energy Utility. And we're on a performance contract with the district government. DC has some of the cleanest, most aggressive energy policies in the nation. And so that's what we're here for, to help roll that out. And so we're responsible for program design and implementation closer to home.
Wow. So this is more pilot. This is pilot prototyping type of systems that you're putting in place right now.
Yeah, it's used as an example for a lot of programs across the country.
Awesome.
But the organization has been around for about 10 years. No, longer than, about 10 years now.
Okay.
Yep. And the parent company is the parent company who helps set this up is in Vermont. But yeah, I'm working locally with a local organization to support our local communities, from residential to some of the largest commercial and institutional organizations in the city. So we do everything from, the reason I do like this organization is because it's not just about program implementation and so on, but a huge component is the social justice component, which makes it different from a lot of energy efficiency programs. About 20% of our funding goes to affordable housing, including multifamily, single family home projects, and shelters, income qualified healthcare clinics and things like that. And so impacting real lives right here in the district. So that's extremely rewarding.
So what does that mean to you? Because I mean, when I think about you, because I know you, of course, but when I think about you, I think about, a lot that you do is always centered around service. How am I serving my my neighbor? How am I serving my family? How am I serving God? How am I serving my community?
Mm-hmm.
So tell me what it's like to actually work to I say work a job, but tell me what it's like to wake up every day and be able to know that the work that you're doing is actually benefiting those who are typically marginalized.
I tell you, I think what brings it closer to home for me is the people, the customers, the locations, the organizations, the groups we work with. I know them, you
Hmm.
know.
Those
I
your
know them.
folks.
Those are my people, right?
Hmm.
I've walked through their doors. I've walked past their doors. Been around the blocks. I've seen neighborhoods turn over and become something different, something new. But there's still something to be had by the community. And I'll give you an example. And I'm not going to call their name, but I got wind that the church I grew up in, they were working with a third party organization to get a new HVAC system for the church and for the parsonage. So they really needed this equipment. It was significant. Obviously, they didn't have the cash to outlay. So this third party group was working with them on financing and so on, which is fabulous. But I got wind of what they were doing. I was like, hey, when you're talking to your contractor or consultant, be sure to mention the DC Sustainable Energy Utility, because we offer an incentive for high performing equipment. So be sure to bring that up in the conversation. And we also offer no cost technical assistance. And this is not to take anybody's job away,
Hmm.
but just be an advocate and give you, the customer, another pair of eyes.
Mm.
And it was a beautiful relationship. They all came together. My team worked with them and they developed a beautiful package, and they got an incentive that they've already essentially paid for, because every energy user in the district pays into a sustainable energy trust fund. And we turn those dollars right back around to go right back into the community. We make sure low income and affordable housing neighborhoods and multifamily units get their piece. There's a piece for solar, and there's a piece for energy efficiency for every energy user who's interested in upgrading or using high efficiency equipment. So, like I said, I know these people.
That's
You know,
beautiful.
isn't that?
Man, that's
What
super
more
beautiful.
can you
That's
do, right?
super beautiful. I just did not know the interconnectivity that energy had from a policy standpoint, from a social justice standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, not having someone at the table, and even in that space,
Yeah.
uh, can really, continue to perpetuate certain communities, being without and not having.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always mean those are just communities of color. Like you said, these small
No.
towns in the middle of nowhere,
Yeah.
are in need of basic supply of energy.
Yeah.
And so, there's places and spaces in the country where there needs to be a form of governance so that large corporations can't take advantage of, people's backyards and
Mm-hmm.
all that kind of stuff. So I think that's super impactful, super
Yeah.
powerful. Uh,
Yeah.
and so, last thing as we wrap up, because of the uh, COVID-19 situation that has happened, a lot of people weren't able to experience closure and commencement all at the same time. So for high school students who were looking to finish up, and those high school students that are still finishing up,
Mm-hmm.
didn't get to go to prom, didn't get to do the whole, finishing up high school. Those who are finishing up with their undergraduate or their graduate degree didn't get to walk across the stage. And A&T, we it's a sermon, it's a party, it's everything you wanted to be in them 2-3 hours. so
Absolutely,
so
absolutely.
for everybody listening, I know this is very impromptu, but for everybody listening, what would your message be to the high school senior and the college graduate right now as they're pursuing their further education, or for those who are now pursuing a career?
You know, This COVID-19 pandemic, and it's a global pandemic, it forces us to think differently. And so for those who are reaching these major milestones in their lives, and it's well achieved, and they deserve celebration. They deserve to celebrate, to be recognized, to be acknowledged. What I will suggest is that they be open to celebrating differently so that they can have fun, but still be safe. I'm thinking about my goddaughter's high school graduation. We just went all out for her this past weekend. Her parents, said, you know what, we're going to take the celebration to our front yard and invite our family and friends to drive by and celebrate her. They even had party favors out that Marley and some other kids were just like running up to cars to pass out to say thank you for driving by and celebrating my goddaughter Micah. And people were dropping off gifts. They were giving party favors and, doing this kind of car parade, because one thing I do know is that when we reach these milestones, you have to celebrate. Because I've had so much loss in my own life, every happy moment, I make it my business to have fun, to recognize, to celebrate, to just enjoy the good things in life. And we still can do that. We just need to do it safely, because this coronavirus, COVID-19, it's very real and it's impacting our community at significant rates.
Definitely. I just have this back of the brain thought that these two nodes of in academics, like these two, I don't want to call them generations because they're not generations, but these two groups, those who were finishing up from a collegiate level and those finishing up from a high school level in 2020, I just feel like those two groups are going to have a different type of hustle and a different type of grit. Because typically, if you don't really receive that kind of closure, you kind of have a chip on your shoulder.
Yeah,
and I truly believe that chip on the shoulders of these graduates are really going to begin changing the scale on what we expect our country to be moving forward. And so, as I round that out with the expectations that you have laid out for us, and the need to make sure that we pursue justice, social justice, and looking out for the common man in all our jobs and all the things that we do. And just because that you're pursuing a degree in architectural engineering, a degree in mechanical engineering, a degree in, biology or nursing or mathematics, it doesn't mean that does not lead to a groundbreaking career path that allows you to positively impact the lives of those people, not just here in the country, but globally. I mean, the fact that we have this technology now, we're not necessarily having to stick to our zip code, like you said at the beginning. We're now able to be global in our living room.
Right. Exactly. Which is phenomenal.
And so this thing is going to change our lives.
I'm sorry. I just don't think my mother or my grandmother could ever imagine this happening.
This is crazy.
Yeah.
But it's always the things that are adversity that always allows us to find ways to grow. And our communities have always grown larger over adversity. And I'll wrap it up like this to give you your kudos and your pat on the back. I believe that you were grown out of adversity. I believe that you walking by people shooting up during the crack cocaine epidemic, pretty much allowed you to lean on your exposure to the foundation that you learned from home and from church. And I think it's that exposure that we need to continuously provide for our youth so that they can understand and know that there are things that are possible. And that, there are no decisions that are final for anybody just because you live up or grow up in one zip code. And so, Crystal McDonald, I just want to thank you so much for being a part of the network today. I thank you for providing your wisdom and providing your insight to, your experience through your academic career and how that has parlayed into a career in energy, sustainability, social justice, and making sure the least of those are always seen at the very forefront and are given the best that we can provide. So thank you all for listening to another episode of the Build Community Through Love podcast. You can keep up with us at Build Community Through Love on Facebook and on Instagram. We got to keep working, good people. So in the meantime, if anyone asks, tell them we're building.